Hey guys, Board now back with you for another Buffy the Vampire Slayer review as I continue my look through the second season. But before I start on the episode, I should probably reflect on the past week and the horrible news coming out of the Whedon verse and the allegations made against Joss Whedon by Charisma Carpenter, which has been backed up by at least a few other people. Amber Benson, for example, has said she experienced similar things at the hands of Whedon, and it really paints a pretty sad, depressing picture. And, I guess there's nothing much more to say except my support and sympathy goes out to the victims and to Charisma Carpenter. She's obviously been very brave in the circumstances. And, I mean, I guess we'll see where this leads. But, yeah, it's for such a beloved show and for, you know, being a big fan of Whedon himself, his work, then this is really tough to hear, and it just sort of gets worse and worse. Some of the stuff coming out about him. Again, my support and everything behind Charisma Carpenter, who's been very brave to come out with this stuff in the last week, and I hope she deals with it and comes to terms and can go on living and having a productive life. But yeah, it must be very tough for her to have to face up to this. So very sad to hear and tough as a Whedon fan to hear. Now, of course, people always discuss, can you separate the art from the artist and all this sort of thing. Now, in this case, I think I definitely can do, because I think, for one, I've always been someone who can do that anyway, because I just think you have to look at someone's work and their art separately from them as a person, because at the end of the day we don't really know much about these people anyway, whether they're good or bad or what they get up to. So I think it's a bit of a slippery slope to be doing that. Obviously, in certain circumstances, it's very hard to separate the two. Now, obviously, Buffy as a show, Whedon has a very distinct style, the dialogue in particular. And with that's, just great dialogue, which I think you can obviously still enjoy without feeling kind of bad about it. But, I mean, I think he was one of those showrunners that work really stands out. And obviously, people question his feminist credentials, which is maybe fair as a person, but as a writer and what he did, I think his stuff still stands up as culturally important when it comes to at least being a feminist writer and what he did on Buffy and stuff. So that's different. I think I can still separate that. But the other point of view, I think, which is worth pointing out, is that with a show like Buffy, there are so many moving parts. There are so many things that appeal about it, which aren't all attached to Whedon. So I think, obviously, the casting and the characters, which that core cast, the Scoobies, are a big reason of what makes the show. I think, even I've said it before, even in weaker episodes, they are very enjoyable. And yeah, certainly Charisma Carpenter is really great as Cordelia. She's a great sort of comic timing, and the character is such a great character with some great dialogue and stuff. So there's lots that goes into Buffy as a show. It's not all stuff that you can attach to Whedon. So it obviously will be sour for a while, and it's a tough period for fans of the show, fans of Whedon as a writer director. But we'll get through it. But again, my strong support goes out to Charisma Carpenter and anyone else who's been in similar situations. So now on with the review. So this week I am looking at episode 12 of the second season of Buffy. It is Bad Eggs, and it's the episode where Buffy goes all invasions of the body snatchers, so a tribute to that classic science fiction tale. So the episode starts off with Buffy and Mum shopping at the mall, and her mum tells Buffy to sort of do something to help her out because she has a big event at the gallery, has to pick a bit of clothing up for Joyce, and Buffy gets distracted by this new vampire in town, Lyle Gorch, who's like this cowboy, like a western type vampire. And they get into a little tussle. Buffy gets distracted and doesn't pick up Joyce's dress. And from that moment on, it seems like she's in Joyce's bad books throughout the episode. It's like Buffy can do no wrong. So Buffy alerts Giles to the appearance of Goich, or sorry, Lyle Goich. He looks into it, and it turns out there's also a brother, and that they have this history of wreaking havoc and massacring a lot of villages and stuff like that, even though, according to Giles, they are quite dim-witted, but can't be taken lightly. So they at first appear to be like the monster of the week, but in fact the monster of the week later becomes these eggs, these alien creatures which start to hatch out of the eggs, and the eggs in question are like a school project which the Scoobies are given, where it's that old experiment you see in a lot of film TV where they get school students to, as an experiment for adulthood, look after eggs for a weekend basically. It's weird to me now. I'm assuming maybe it's one of those things that is based on like a real thing, because it does seem to happen a lot on particularly like American TV shows. But if you're from America watching this, and you've ever come across this experiment at school, then please let me know, because I am curious if it is a real thing. As I said, I'm guessing it is just because it pops up on so many American shows. But that the eggs turn out to be infected, basically, and that's what leads us to the main monster of the week, where they start hatching and they start infecting them. And at one point, Willow and Xander are affected, and it sort of spirals out of control. And it's building to this big thing at the end, where you've got like the mother alien below the surface, and they've got to get all these eggs to feed it and basically ultimately hatch it. So that's kind of the plot of the episode, and it's a really forgettable, bland episode. It feels very filler. I'll say I did quite enjoy the surreal invasion of the body snatchers plot. I do enjoy that movie, at least a couple of versions of it, and there is something quite fun, cheesy, and B movie about the premise. I think as the episode goes on, and you get more into that plot, that's when it gets more interesting. That's when visually the episode sort of takes off, and there is quite a fun, scrungy sort of feel to like this alien monster when we see it below us, and the eye coming out. It's sort of cheesy, but in a fun, nostalgic type way. And I think there are at least a couple of nice turns. The way it's revealed that Willow and Cordelia are infected. So those moments work pretty well, but overall the episode is a bit of a dud. It's kind of just lame and sort of boring. Now, one thing I will say, because this is worth mentioning, is that it's actually the debut on Buffy for Marti Noxon, who would go on to become one of the big writers writer-directors on the series. In fact, come the last 2 seasons, she would become the main showrunner, but has a lot of big episodes across I guess 6 seasons for her since she's debuting here, but a lot of big episodes. She writes this one, and David Greenwalt is the director, so pretty solid team there of the pair of them, but fair to say they both have better moments. Now, there's nothing wrong with Noxon's script in terms of the dialogue. There's some fun sort of Scooby dialogue in here, and it's just overall not the most interesting episode. It's all a bit bland for the most part. Even the comedy isn't that amazing. There are some fun. There's some good Sander Cordy moments, like the continuing banter between them. And there's a scene early on in class when it's kind of a sex education lesson, and this is when the teacher assigns them the eggs. And of course, Sandra and Cordy are still doing this thing where they're trying to keep their relationship like a secret, so they're doing the sneaking off to like the cupboard whole thing. And in this scene where they're talking about like sex and what have you in this class, these this sort of heat between them starts rising to the surface. So you get some good sparring sort of moments between them. So it's a pretty cool episode for Xander and Cordy. There's some good solid thematic stuff as well, because I think when we see Joyce and Buffy, and Joyce in this opening scene, it's kind of bad Joyce. She's kind of being a bit over the top with like just ticking sort of telling Buffy off, but kind of in a really harsh sort of way. But she's also getting on a case about, you got distracted by a boy, right? Do you ever think about anything but boys and clothes, I think it was. And I'll say Buffy's line is a bit on the nose here, because she actually makes a joke about, which obviously isn't a joke to us, but she actually comes out and says it about slaying vampires or killing vampires, and that's just a little too on the nose. It's obviously one of those things where she knows that her mother's not going to take it seriously, but it's just too on the nose in a way, I think, that stuff. That opening scene, actually, I think one thing it captures is that the kind of just the coldness and the loneliness of shopping malls in a way. I think the whole tone of the mall and the vibe is captured really well, about how it's just wall to wall shops and how you just wander around them, and it's quite an isolating experience in many ways, but that's captured pretty well in that scene. But yeah, this is not good Joyce really in this episode, although the chemistry is there again between mother and daughter. But there's some pretty solid thematic stuff, as I said, because Buffy and Angel are starting to get serious in this episode. That they're supposed to be patrolling, keeping an eye out for the Gorch brothers, and yet they can't take their hands off each other. And again, that goes to what Joyce was criticising Buffy for, or accusing her for. I think this is also set up for the coming episodes, because the next 2 episodes are two really biggies, a massive two-parter in the series and the show overall. I mean, the next 2 episodes, Surprise and Innocence, are when the show takes a real turn, and when from those episodes on, we're off as far as Buffy is concerned, as far as the great Buffy show that we all know and love. So 2 of the biggest episodes of the whole show coming up. But yeah, I think they're setting the table for that in some ways, showing that Buffy and Angel are getting like even closer. And there's a comment about from Buffy at one point when Angel asks her, do you ever think about the future? And she says no a couple of times, and then she says, when I think about the future, all I think of is you, Angel. You're all I see, sort of thing. So pretty accurate teenage sort of angst there from Buffy, but it's all setting the table nicely for the coming episode, so I can't really fault it for that. And I think there's some solid thematic stuff in this. Another criticism really of the episode is the Gorge brothers, because they're kind of okay for comic relief, but they're a little bit bland as well, and I don't think we really needed like two of them. They're obviously twin brothers, that's the whole thing. I guess they just did that because there's more comic potential with them bantering, and you get these scenes where they're sort of biding their times when they're just watching over Angel and Buffy, like in the graveyard, and they're waiting to get Buffy on her own. And the episode, I think, is setting you up to maybe think that they're the main monster of the week, but I didn't find them that interesting. I think there's not that much that stands out to them, and I never believed they were this big threat. I mean, certainly you put them next to Spike and some of the other main vampires on the show, then they're just not that inspiring. And it just felt like they were just there just to add a bit more of a threat, and then you kind of get them intersect with the monster, with the egg plot and stuff. But they really don't need to be in this episode. That they take up too much time. And it's interesting because one of them gets killed off during like the big finale scene, but the other one, Lyle, survives, and he kind of runs off when he sees what's going down with the whole egg business. But he obviously they plan to bring him back, and he does come back, but he comes back quite a bit later. We're talking next season now, and I don't know, when you see it's sort of a random appearance in some ways, so I'm not sure whether they had that in mind, whether they were thinking we'll bring this guy back a lot sooner. But in any case, yeah, the Gorge brothers really don't do much for me. I think they're kind of lame, and if it was a different episode where you could give them more to do, then maybe they could be more of a threat. But I never thought they were anything other than comic relief. I think Sander has quite a nice moment at the end of the episode where everything goes back to normal. He comes up with this excuse that it was like a gas leak, and he sort of checks on everyone, and that's a nice little moment for him. And Buffy's iconic sort of image, in a way, her coming out of the hole with the goo all over is pretty cool. That's a nice little shot. And she ends up grounded, of course, but is still kissing Angel at the end, because technically she's not breaking any rules because he's there at the window and she's the other side. But yeah, pretty bland episode overall. Cheesy monster of the week. Not a lot going for it. So I'll give it a 5.5 out of 10. Yeah, sort of middle of the road episode. Very average. Much better to come. So 5.5 out of 10. And that means that on the big Buffy list, it's going to go in at number 17, which is below Out of Mind, Out of Sight, and just above Reptile Boy from this season. So it's not quite as bad as the lowest of the low, but it's pretty low. That's my thoughts on Bad Eggs. And as I said, a massive two-parter coming up with Surprise and Innocence. So, boy, we have some great times coming in the Buffyverse. This episode, of course, this review goes out to Charisma Carpenter, who's really great in this episode. But I'll be back with more Buffy soon. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.